Do you guys want to make a bet, a friendly wager for charity about what happens in June? I'll make a bet with you guys.
June, you mean the debt ceiling?
Yeah. What do you guys think happens? Do you think this is going to be a fractious, chaotic thing where the markets get roiled?
No, I think it's going to be a pretty
rubber stamp,
straightforward deal where it's going to come down to the wire. But my guess is no one's going to want to default on the debt.
Yep.
And there's going to be some concessions on spending. And ultimately, the debt ceiling will get extended. And that those concessions on spending will allow the Republican Party to save face with their voters and say, look, we got some concessions here. I'm not sure they're going to be enough to really address any of the major problems that the U.S. is facing over the longer term. But, certainly letting the debt ceiling hit and defaulting is catastrophic. Everyone knows
I'm with
that.
Freeberg. I think the majority case is a bunch of hand-wringing and then they make a concession.
All the people that are interested in this topic, I would go use the Wayback Machine and go and read all of the articles in the 80s where you could replace China with Japan. And what happened with Japan is that Japan just hit a demographic wall, not dissimilar to what China's about to hit in the next 15 or 20 years.
Right. It's a good counter argument. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that there is this element of, China as the primary threat. But I think the bigger problem, Chamath, is that we have voted ourselves into a stupor. We have allowed ourselves to accrue these liabilities that are, in many cases, not on the balance sheet, that we simply cannot afford to pay. And the social unrest that will arise if and when we don't pay them, or the economic cost of us actually paying them, either of those are going to be pretty significant. But that's water under the bridge, and it has nothing to do with China. It has just everything to do with how the U.S. is spending.
Thank you for being intellectually honest. This is my point. I agree with you about the importance of these unfunded liabilities. I just completely disagree with you that this argument about these things being so hyper-connected, or that all of a sudden we're at the cliff of de-dollarization, I don't think it's rooted in facts. And I think, again, it ignores this unbelievably important piece of logic that all of you guys that say this tend to ignore. And it's still, and it's not even well addressed in Dalio's book, which is it is a pegged currency. And the minute you unpeg it, none of you know what happens to it, except that it probably isn't where it's trading today. And if you actually then have to factor in dollar reserves that everybody holds, that thing would skyrocket in value and it would crush the export value of the yuan. And it happens to all currencies. And this is this funny thing that has happened to the United States, which is that it ran forward and it transitioned its economy to a service-led economy faster than other countries and other economies and other currencies did. And nobody wants to just talk about that, except it's the facts.
We're talking
and
about
that's what sort of drives us.
Go ahead, Sachs.
I don't think the big risk is that all of a sudden the dollar gets replaced by the yuan as the world's reserve currency. I think Freeberg lays out a more intermediate path, which is people start to hedge their dollar exposure. And decisions that used to be automatic, like trading oil in dollars, the so-called petrodollar, now it becomes a little bit, more of a decision. So, the Saudis.
That's what happened with the pound sterling. It was a similar story, and it was not an overnight collapse. I mean, there were certainly these kind of punctuated moments where there were hits, but, the history is that there was a slow devaluation over time, and as a result of, obviously, the economic pressure and the uncertainty.
Actually, no. What happened to pound sterling was that it was pegged to the US dollar, and then it became unpegged. So exactly what I'm talking about.
No, even post that, Chamath.
Even post that, if it's a free-floating currency, yeah, you're proving my point. No, dude, you're proving my point. When Soros broke the back of the US dollar, what he forced George Brown, or what he forced the Chancellor of the Exchequer to do, was to basically depeg the pound. And then, yes, you're right, it's been like this ever since.
Yeah,
that proves what I'm saying.
It was not.
If you let it be free-floating, nobody wants to trade in that other currency. Everybody wants the dollar. As bad as the dollar is, David's right. It is the worst affected leper in the leper colony.
Yes.
The handsomest leper still in the colony.
This is why you have to have, if you're going to be intellectually honest, just have a relative conversation about all of the currencies and all the things that they're also going through, which are also not perfect.
The debt payments for the emerging and the frontier markets are extraordinary.
Just realize that if you want to go and peg your economy to somebody else's back, they also come with their own trials and tribulations that you have to risk manage as well. And now you have to decide on balance, do you want to risk manage a centrally governed economy, right, from a central bureau, or a freewheeling democratic? Like, these are all the discussions that people should need to have.
Yeah, there's a lot of choices there.
Just back to the non-currency part of this for a second. There are a lot of like connections between these things. I actually think there is a strong connection between what's happening, for example, in Chicago with the out of control civil service and the unfunded pensions all the way to the dollar status. But there's also a connection between commercial real estate and these pensions. So on a previous show, we talked about the commercial real estate looming crisis. And a lot of people thought that, some of the comments we were just talking our book, which is not true. I don't have a dollar invested in any of these office towers. But you know who does? Pension funds. That's who owns these office towers. So you're talking about pension funds that are 3/4 unfunded, and they may have a lot less funds than they even think they do, because we're about to have a huge reckoning where all of a sudden these office towers that were supposed to be blue chip, that were supposed to have the best collateral there was in major American cities, now all of a sudden they may not be nearly as valuable as they thought they were.
Yeah, and if they don't own the building, they definitely own the debt. 100% for sure in the fixed income portfolios of all these pension systems are the debt that was used to finance these buildings by the REITs and by, the big real estate funds that put those things together. So you're absolutely right. They are 100% impacted by what's about to happen.
We're not going to allow, given the civil unrest and social unrest risk, and obviously as a democracy, we're not going to allow that all to go to zero, and we're not going to let pensioners not get paid. Ultimately, that's just a kiss of death. Maybe pension payments are reduced to some degree. But again, Paris is a really great example of, as you start to try and shift the economic guarantees that have been made to pensioners, even slightly.
Yeah, what was it, 2 years in retirement? 62
they
to
tried
64?
to move retirement age
64
by
to 62?
2 years. Yeah, and it was certainly like, you could sit here and argue what people for years, for their whole life, had this expectation set. We have all, for our whole careers, invested in the Social Security benefits that we're owed as retirees through every paycheck that we've received. And those Social Security payments may not end up coming back to us if Social Security is allowed to go bankrupt. So ultimately, the government has to step in and issue new dollars to make that up. Then the economic question is, what happens to the value of the dollar? What happens to the value of the economy? And so on, as you issue trillions of dollars to fill these holes.
Let me ask a question that's a little more positive here, perhaps, which is there a path out of this, debt cycle we're in? And what are the top ways in which we're going to get ourselves out of this? I have three that come off the top of my head.
Increased productivity.
Hold on. I have three off the top of my head. Number one is austerity measures. Number two is productivity through technology. And perhaps number three is maybe recruiting more entrepreneurs here to start more companies and, fill some of these jobs. So intelligent immigration, which
number
I'll call
one is higher
recruitment.
taxes. Yeah. Number one is higher taxes in terms of what's likely
That's
to
a
happen.
fourth
Or
one.
reduce spending.
That
or
would be a
reduce
fourth
spending.
one. That's
I think
austerity.
So look, higher taxes, because you can go after assets, you can go after wealth. So there will be higher taxes.
Okay. So
Right.
that's a fourth.
I still think we'll end up seeing 70% tax rates on the wealthiest people in this country.
70%?
I don't see it being like unpopular. I think it's going to be unpopular with the wealthy. It's going to be popular elsewhere to fill the hole. Second is cut back on spending, but that's a really hard thing to do because, as we've talked about in the past, people vote to get more stuff. So you put the politician in who's going to vote to get you more stuff. You don't vote people in to go cut spending. So generally, we're going to likely see number one happen first. Maybe there'll be a reckoning where you kind of reduce spending. It's going to take extraordinary political will and an extraordinary depth of education and diffusion of understanding of this key critical economic problem amongst the voting class, which is a really hard thing to realize. I think number three,
you're saying get the public to
understand
that we have to have austerity measures.
Yeah, and then number three, and basically people are going to have to make sacrifices. So the first sacrifice will be the wealthy. They're going to have to sacrifice through higher taxes. The second sacrifice will be everyone else by seeing reduced spending and reduced kind of
services,
the services, et cetera. The third is the hopeful one, but we don't have a guarantee on this, which is, do we see economic growth through productivity gains? Can we create leverage with our resources and our people by using new technologies to get more with less?